The wind scraped across the prairie like a rasp dragging dust in long, lazy curls across the bone-dry ground. Nothing moved but the sky. Gray clouds hung low, pregnant with a storm that never came, and the land below stretched flat and hollow, as if God had forgotten it. A wire fence sagged under the weight of years' posts leaning like tired men, and near one of them a woman knelt. Her fingers dug through packed earth, stiff and red from cold and effort. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in days, maybe weeks. Her face was drawn, lips cracked, the skin beneath her eyes pale as linen. Her dress, once plum-colored, had faded to the color of old bruise. She wore no coat. Only a shawl clung to her shoulders, thin and wind-worn, useless against the bite of the season. The grave she dug wasn't new. It had settled in the time since she buried her youngest, and every month she came to break it open again, not with a shovel but with her hands clawing into memory until she could breathe. She didn't speak to the dirt. There was no need. Her presence was enough. Her breathing, her silence, her ritual. Behind her a horse whinnied, but she didn't turn. She knew the sound, knew the way the saddle leather creaked when the wind caught it just so, knew the weight of the eyes that watched her from across the fence line. He didn't speak either. Not yet. She stood finally, slow and shaking like the roots of her rose too, and didn't want to let go. Her skirts clung to her knees, heavy with dust. Her hair, once pinned, had loosened in the wind and blew in strands around her face. She walked back toward the fence, passing the cross she had built from scrap wood and wire, the edges weathered now, near splintering. The cowboy waited. He was tall, but not in the way that made men proud of it. He didn't fill space, he fit it. His coat was duster brown, his hat low over his eyes, and the horse beside him, a dun with a limp in its back leg, shifted in the silence. She climbed the fence without a word. He offered no hand. They'd ridden in silence for nearly a week now. A job brought them west, a herding contract north of the river. She'd signed on as cook, though her hands hadn't made a proper biscuit in months, and he hadn't asked why she needed it. He didn't ask where she was from either. Just looked once at her raw palms and the way she cinched her boots too tight, and said she could ride his extra mule if she needed. Now he gave her a look steady, unreadable. "You ready?" he asked. Her nod was barely there. She reached for the reins, the leather cracked and soft from use. The trail was silent but for hooves and the wind's long whistle. The land around them changed only in color. Rust gave way to frost, to clay, to dry creek beds that held stories no one told aloud. He rode slightly ahead, and she didn't try to catch up. They both understood the pace of grief. When they stopped that night, they found a hollow near an outcrop of rock, sheltered on one side by cottonwoods with bare arms. He gathered the firewood. She lit it. Neither spoke of the grave. Neither had to. But when the flames licked high and their cans of beans hissed on the stones, she looked up and asked, "How long were you alone?" He didn't answer right away. Poked the fire with a stick. Then, soft as smoke still am. The quiet after that was thick and good. Not every silence was empty. She leaned back, eyes on the stars. The cold crept through her bones, but she didn't shiver. He watched her from across the fire, his hat tipped back. There was something in the set of his shoulders, weariness, yes, but not just that. A kind of waiting. "You don't ask much," he said. "No use asking what someone ain't ready to say." A coyote called in the distance, thin and lonely. She pulled the shawl tighter. "I had 3, she said after a time. "Children, I mean." He looked up. Waited. "They're all gone." He nodded once, a slow thing that held weight. "I had 2 brothers. Lost one to fever, one to war. Now it's just me." They didn't speak again that night. But when the fire burned low and she laid down, he gave her the extra blanket from his pack without a word. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. and for the first time in a long while her body sank into rest. If this story touched something deep within you, subscribe and keep walking the road ahead with us. The sun woke slow, filtered through cottonwoods, with gold-flecked light that did nothing to ease the cold. Frost rimmed the edges of her blanket, and her breath came in visible clouds as she sat up. Her bones ached from the ground, but she did not complain. He was already up, already working. She watched him cinch the saddle, firm and methodical, moving with the kind of grace that came from habit, not pride. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. There was a rhythm to his work, like he'd done it every morning since boyhood, and maybe he had. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stirred the ashes with a stick. Some faint red embers still pulsed beneath the gray, enough to heat water. She set the pot on, careful not to knock anything loose. When he glanced back, his mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite, but close. "You always this quiet in the morning?" she asked. "Only when there's nothing worth saying yet." The coffee was bitter, boiled too long, but it was warm and strong, and neither of them minded. They sipped it, crouched near the embers like old dogs, the silence between them solid and unshakable. By noon they crossed the scrub hills and dropped into a shallow basin where grass came up in winter tufts and the sky opened wide again. She rode with her shoulders hunched, hands wrapped around the saddle horn, but her gaze had steadied. She no longer scanned the horizon like it might strike her from behind. When they reached the fence line, he dismounted to check a break in the wire. She followed, not because she could help, but because standing still made her restless now. "You any good with pliers?" he asked, tugging at a rusted strand. She shrugged. "I raised 3 alone. Learned plenty I didn't expect to." He handed her the tool without comment and let her hold the wire while he twisted it back through the post. Her hands fumbled at first, but he didn't correct her, just worked around her mistakes. She caught on quick. "Who taught you?" she asked. "My father," he said, "and his father before him. You always know you'd stay." He glanced over his eyes, squinting under the brim. "Didn't seem like much of a choice. When land calls you by name, you don't walk the other way." She let the words settle. There was something in the way he said land that sounded more like kin than property. That night they camped near a dry creek bed ringed by stones and scrub cedar. He skinned a rabbit with slow precision while she scrubbed the pot with grit and cold water. Her fingers stung, but she said nothing. She liked the work, the ache of it. It kept her mind still. As they ate, he asked what were their names. She didn't answer at first. Then, one by one, she spoke them. Miriam. She was oldest. Always humming. You'd tell her no, and she'd laugh like it was a challenge. Then Joe, quiet but stubborn as an oak stump. Last was Eli, barely 6 when he took sick. Held my hand all through the night, just whispering nonsense till he slipped off. He didn't look at her while she spoke. Just kept chewing, nodding now and then like he was filing each name away somewhere private. "You bury them yourself?" he asked. "Mostly," she said. "Neighbors helped with the first 2. No one left by the time Ellie passed. Just me and the Lord, and I wasn't sure he was still listening." He wiped his hands on a cloth. "He listens. Just don't always answer fast." She let out a sound that was nearly a laugh. "You sound sure." "I ain't," he admitted, "but I keep talking just in case." The fire burned low again, soft shadows dancing over his face. The lines around his mouth deepened when he stared into the flames, and she realized he wasn't just watching. He was remembering. "You ever marry?" she asked, not sure why. "Once," he said. "Didn't take." She liked the idea of a rancher more than the life of one. City girl. Wanted church socials and a porch swing, not dead calves and busted gates. She leave? First, winter. Did it hurt? He paused, then said, "Not as much as it should." "Which is what hurt the most?" She nodded, slow. She understood that kind of ache, The hollowness that followed you not because you were broken but because you weren't sure there was anything left to break. They didn't speak again that night. But when she lay down, it wasn't just his blanket that kept her warm. It was the space beside her no longer so empty. The days passed with the same rhythm ride mend eat sleep. No roads, no signs, just the land rolling out before them in its hard, indifferent beauty. And in that sameness something softened between them. She began to rise before him, not to prove anything, just because her body no longer fought the cold quite so hard. She moved easier now, stronger in the saddle, quicker on her feet. She learned the lines of the land like they were lines of a face she'd once loved, where the grass bent to hide a spring, where the hawk circled a den, where the light turned gold and warned of frost. He taught her things without saying much, let her hold the lead rope while he checked hooves, handed her the rifle without fanfare when they spotted coyotes too near the cattle, trusted her with small things which in a world like this were everything. She began humming, sometimes low and tuneless, more feeling than melody. And when she did, he'd glance over just for a second. She noticed. One night after supper, she sat with her back against a rock and watched him clean his saddle. The fire cracked soft between them. Crickets sang from the grass. I used to think, she said, that grief was like drowning, that it pulled you under all at once. He looked up. But it's not, she went on. It's more like walking through a river. You keep moving, keep feeling the drag, and some days it's up to your chest. Some days it's just at your ankles. But it never really goes away. He didn't offer comfort, didn't reach for her hand or try to fix it. He just nodded and went back to his work, and she was grateful for that. Later she asked, "Why do you keep to yourself like you do?" He didn't look up. Seen what happens when you build too much around other people. Like what? He shrugged. My brother built a whole life around his wife. She died in childbirth. He didn't last 6 months after. Maybe it wasn't weakness, she said. Maybe it was love. He stopped, looked at her like he was seeing her through smoke. That's what scares me, he said. How strong it can be. The fire cracked again. She felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket. I'm not trying to scare you, she said, voice quiet. I know. They didn't touch. But when they slept that night, their bedrolls were closer than they'd been. And when she stirred in the dark, cold pressing against her back, she found he'd thrown his coat over her without waking. The next morning they reached the southern ridge where the herd had last been spotted. The land opened into a wide plain, scrub covered and silent. They found the cattle penned in a crude split-rail corral built by someone ahead of them. All safe. No rustlers. No sign of sickness. He exhaled a quiet relief and started checking them one by one. She didn't wait for instructions. Grabbed a bucket and fetched water from the creek they'd passed. Set to work clearing out old feed, brushing down the smaller ones. He watched her once from behind the fence, then went back to his work. By dusk, the job was done. They'd be paid at the next town over. 2 days' ride. As they sat by the fire that night, eating jerky and biscuit crumbs, she said, I'm not going back. He looked up slow. Back where? To the house, she said. To the grave. To the place where everything's gone. I buried what I needed to. What's left of me doesn't belong there anymore. He nodded, stirred the fire with a stick. You think this place wants you? He asked. She thought about it. The wind, the dust, the space, the silence. I think it doesn't care. And that's a kind of freedom. He smiled faint. Fair enough. She reached for his hand. Just placed hers on top of it, light, deliberate. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Would it scare you, she asked, if I said I didn't want to ride the rest of this trail alone? He turned his hand under hers. Held it. No, he said. Not if we keep walking through the same river. They left before dawn, the sky still wrapped in blue-gray hush. He led as usual, but she was close behind now, the distance between them barely the length of a horse's tail. They didn't speak much on the trail, but something had shifted, an ease in the silence, no longer heavy, no longer needing to prove itself. The land changed as they moved west. Cottonwoods gave way to bare rock and dry plateaus. The grass thinned. The air cooled. On the second day they reached the outskirts of town, a sprawl of low buildings and clapboard fronts nestled beside a slow winding river. Smoke rose from chimneys. A bell clanged somewhere down the road. Life moved without ceremony. They stabled the horses first, then made their way to the foreman's office. He paid them in paper bills, crisp and folded, placed with care into their hands. She tucked hers into the seam of her saddlebag without looking at the number. He watched her do it. Said nothing. They took a room above the general store, a narrow space with 2 cots and a cracked window that let in the dust. She unpacked in silence. So did he. Neither commented on the single oil lamp or the thin walls. They slept back to back that night, their breaths in rhythm. By morning the town's quiet rhythm had settled into her bones. She rose early and washed at the basin. Braided her hair. Pulled on the same clothes, but something about her looked changed, lighter maybe, or just less guarded. Downstairs she asked the storekeeper if they needed help. He gave her a look like he wasn't sure what to make of her, but nodded toward the crates near the back. She spent the morning stocking shelves, moving flour sacks, arranging jars in straight, glassy lines. When she glanced through the window, she saw him across the road talking to a blacksmith. His posture was easy, familiar, as if he'd always belonged here. By evening they sat on the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the last light catch on the river. "You thinking of staying?" he asked. She sipped, then nodded. "Town's got work. Storekeeper said I could take the back room if I helped mornings." He nodded, too slow and steady. "Could take up work with the ranch north of here. They need someone who knows the land." The silence after was gentle. She looked down at her hands. The cuts had healed, but faint scars remained, little white threads woven across her palms. "I'm scared," she said finally. "Me too," he answered. They left it at that. A week passed, then 2. They built habits. She swept the store porch each morning before the sun hit the awning. He brought back coffee beans and sugar cubes when he rode in from the ranch. They ate together in the evening, sometimes in the room, sometimes outside on the bench. Once she found a book left on her pillow, dog-eared, worn through the spine. No note, but she knew it was from him. Sometimes they touched. A hand on the shoulder, a palm brushed in passing. Small, quiet things. Nothing rushed. Then one night she found him in the alley behind the store, leaning against the wall, staring up at the stars like he was asking them something. He didn't turn when she stepped close. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded, though it wasn't quite convincing. "I got a letter today," he said, "from my brother's widow. Wants me to come back east. Help raise her boy. He's 12 now." She felt her chest tighten. Not jealousy, something sharper. Fear. "What'll you do?" she asked. He turned to face her then. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were soft. "I thought I'd ask you," he said. "What do we do?" It was the first time he'd said we. She stepped closer, heart thudding steady. "We keep walking through the river," she said. "You go if you need to. I'll be here. Or maybe I go with you. But either way, we don't stop moving." He reached for her then, and she let him. Their embrace was quiet. No fire, no flare. Just warmth, real and close, like something found after being lost too long. And when they walked back upstairs, his hand rested against the small of her back like it belonged there. They left together in early spring. The river had thawed. Grass was greening along the banks, and the cottonwoods had begun to show the first signs of leaf. She packed light, just the essentials, wrapped tight and tied well. He brought his tools, a locket that had once belonged to his mother, and the old rifle he never went anywhere without. They didn't speak of permanence. Not yet. They just loaded the mules, saddled the horses, and rode out with the sunrise at their backs. The boy waited in a town just past the Mississippi. She had never met him, but she'd seen the way his name shaped the man's mouth, tight with guilt, loose with longing. She knew better than to ask for promises. The road would make or unmake them. For the first few days they spoke little. Just the creak of saddle leather, the swish of brush, the call of birds overhead. But every now and then, when she glanced over, he'd be watching her. Not out of worry, something else. A kind of wonder. They stopped at a trading post one afternoon where the wind smelled like old tobacco and sweat. A woman behind the counter stared too long at her, then said, "You sure you want to be riding out with the likes of him?" She didn't flinch. Just replied, "He earned my peace." That's enough. That night, as they camped beneath a bluff with the stars bright as fireflies, he said, "I don't know how to be a father." She didn't answer right away. Just fed the fire, let the silence stretch out. "No one does," she said. "You just try not to leave." He nodded, jaw tight. "He might hate me." "He might," she agreed. "Or he might see himself in you. Might need you more than he knows." He looked at her then, long and steady. "You'd stay?" he asked. "If it got hard." She smiled, the kind that came slow but deep. "I buried everything once. I'm not doing that again. Not if I have a say." The road east wasn't easy. Rain came hard one week, and they took shelter in an abandoned church with a half-fallen steeple. They slept on the altar, back to back, with thunder shaking the windows. When lightning split the sky, she reached for his hand in the dark. He held it like he'd never let go. In small towns along the way, they met eyes that questioned, judged, and sometimes smiled. In one place, an old woman gave her a basket of apples and whispered, "He looks at you like a man who thought he'd never feel again." She thanked her without explaining. They reached the town by the river in late May. It was bigger than she expected. Brick buildings, schoolhouse, smoke curling from chimneys, life already in motion. The boy stood on the porch of a narrow house with peeling paint. He had his father's shoulders, his uncle's eyes. When he saw the man ride up, he didn't run. Just stood there, arms crossed, as if daring disappointment to come again. The man dismounted slow, took off his hat. "I came late," he said. "But I came." The boy didn't speak, but he didn't go inside either. She hung back, watching from the gate. Let them have the moment. Later, inside, the boy asked who she was. "She's the one who stayed," the man said. That night she sat on the back steps, the smell of wood smoke in her hair. He joined her, hands calloused, eyes tired. "He's angry," he said. "Let him be," she answered. "It means he's still got fight left in him." They sat like that until the stars came out. Weeks passed, then months. The boy softened slowly. The man learned patience clumsily. She planted flowers along the porch and never told anyone how it felt to see them bloom. The house filled with the sounds of meals, boots, arguments, laughter, life messy and real. On a cool morning in late autumn, she found a ring in her coffee cup, plain silver worn. No words, just his hand on hers, steady and sure. She didn't cry, just nodded. "Yes," she said. At the wedding, the boy stood beside him, silent but proud. He wore a clean shirt and scuffed boots, and when she looked at him, she saw something that hadn't been there before, a willingness to believe. Later that night, she stood in the doorway, watching them fix a broken hinge together. The land outside was quiet. The stars hung low. And for the first time in years, she leaned back, not in fear, not in grief, but in rest. Her children somewhere beyond the sky could finally rest too, because the cowboy had earned their calm. Don't let this journey end here. Subscribe and take the next step.